So welcome to our program, which presently is continuing our study of Abhidharma, which is what enables us to increasingly know what's happening in our mind, which is rather good because we generally are, unless we are habituated to mindfulness, meditation, and so on, then we are not really that aware of what happens within our mind. And so often we're just caught up in our experience without actually being able to deconstruct the elements that constitute our experience. And one way that we do this in the Abhidharma is operating or identifying what we call the 18 dhatus, which are 18 elements that essentially have to do with the 6 senses, in where we are talking about the 5 ordinary senses and then also the mind as a sense. The mind is very much a sense. We're very much aware of that. We have a mind, we experience with the mind, and we have objects of the mind, the various things that come to our mind, and on the basis of that we also experience what we could call moods and effects that these objects of the mind have on us. So together with the other senses, where we then also operate with the organ, the object, and then the actual sense of perception, then we, for each of the various senses that we have, for each of these 6 senses, we have then this threefold modality, which are then the what Steven calls capacity, the object, and then the integrational function, which is then the perceptions of various kinds: visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, and conscious perception. So these are what we're mapping. Now, Steven's methodology is very much to bring us to a place of what he calls sort of becoming accustomed to the language of analysis, to be aware that just because we're having some experience, it's not just that we have an experience, it's actually on the basis of, for example, seeing something. We see something, then we have the dual situation of us, the object, and then the conscious identification that takes place. So he calls these capacity, field, object, integrational function. So that's where he operates with this interesting way of mapping it that we've looked at a bit earlier, which is kind of not so bad. It's interesting. I've never seen it before in Buddhism, but it draws on Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha, and we benefit a lot actually from having this awareness. So, for example, here, we began this section last time where we talked about the moments of a meditator. Now you have a set of numbers, if you like, here, and the second section of the number, you have a slash, and then you have a 1/2/3/4. These are the moments. Now the digit before that, where it says 1/1, 1/2, 1/3, 6/4, 6/5, 6/6, 6/7, etc. These refer to the sense or the capacity that I think Steven refers to it as firing. So the first one refers to the I in the first moment. In the second moment, also I. Third moment, the I. But then the fourth moment, the fifth moment, the sixth moment, the seventh moment, and the 8th and 9th moments, these are all on the basis of the mind. Now that's where this is how we experience. You might, for example, right now be hearing me speaking, right? But then you look up at the chart. So as far as you hearing me in the first moment, that would be a 2. So we would have 2/1, then we'd have 2/2. But then you'll look up at the chart, and then it'll be a 1/3, a 1/4, etc. So in this way, we can become aware that these elements are actually taking place within us. We're no longer just blindly being carried away. We're aware of things. So this is where the where Stephen would like us to become what he calls a bit bilingual. So there he gives this example of the 10 moments that we see up there. And like I was saying before, the first 3 moments consist of the channel 1, meaning the I. The next 6 moments are the firing of channel 6. So this is where we're actually having thoughts. We're going into the realm of the mind. So in this way, we're shifting from visual perception to conscious or mental awareness, and then going back to, what was it again, return to channel 1. We look back at the object. So this is where we're practicing analysis in order to essentially deconstruct what we are normally experiencing as a rather essential or monolithic experience. So this actually this does not go into saying, oh, I'm having a pleasant experience, having a bad experience. It's just that I'm looking right now, and then when we might have mental thoughts about it, or we might have mental reactions, we're just saying, okay, I'm having mental reactions, or whatever it might be. But this is us beginning to become aware of the way that we are experiencing. So I'm going to continue where we left off last time. So he says we have 3 channel 1 broadcasts, which is seeing. Then we have 6 subsequent moments of something else, and we have no idea what that content might be, but we are aware that they were not channels 1 to 5, meaning they were taking place in the mind. So then again, we have another moment of seeing. That's the 10th. So just being aware of that is essentially the point here. It's that we begin to become conscious of the constructed nature of what we are going through. So this is where we're no longer just naively carried along by our mind, but we're beginning to become aware of the content. Of course, this is very different from Western psychology, where you operate in completely different, you could say, ways. But this again, this has essentially been the foundation of Buddhist insight into experience. So this is from the time of the Buddha down to the present day, not out of veneration for the tradition, but just out of the success of this methodology, it remains unchanged to the present day. So Abhidharma is still studied. There's never a notion that we're studying something ancient or whatever it might be. This is something that is, you could say, it's a methodology that is basic really to the entire understanding of how we approach you could say phenomenology within Buddhism, the way that we understand experience. Yeah, Damien?
With the example of going from 1 through to 10 and going from channel 1 to 6 and then back to 1, is that process, like in the very beginner stages of somebody trying to stick shamatha and vipassana together?
Well, so the question is this the analyzing the moments 1 through 10 is the way of joining shamatha and vipassana? I would say this enables us to understand what we're doing when we're practicing shamatha. But as any analysis, any time that we're analyzing in Buddhism, it's always part of vipassana. So this is the vipassana that understands shamatha, if you like. But anytime that you're questioning something, and that's not just in Buddhism, it's in life. Anytime that we question things, we begin to understand complexity. We begin to basically have a wider perspective. So that would constitute, the exercise constitutes vipassana. And of course, there's many different ways of understanding vipassana, but essentially the analysis is vipassana. But we're going to look at how then this applies when we do meditation, when we do shamatha. So that's what comes next. So beginning shamatha experience. Now, shamatha means calm abiding, and that is where the mind remains focused, remains clear. Normally, the mind is never focused. We're scattered. We have one thought here, one thought here. there's never ever a time that we're actually settling the mind. Unless we're meditators, our mind by default is always tagging along after some objects. Basically, we can identify what exactly is happening in terms of the schemata here, because our mind will be running after visual objects, auditory objects, gustatory objects, and so forth. So it's always basically going all over the shop. And if we want to know what is the mind doing in general, well, we actually have this map here, so we'd know what's going on. Now, what we're going to do with shamatha is essentially bring the mind back to just staying on one particular object. And so that's where, for example, it could be an external object. That's then the capacity of the eye engaging number 7, and we have then a 13, but basically then we would talk about essentially visual perception as number 1. And then just that is then where we would practice not being distracted. So that's where we do something different when we meditate. And that's where we as meditators, we become humbly aware of, well, I was supposedly focusing on something, you know, my breath or whatever it might be. And then we become aware, hey, I actually can't focus. My mind is going here, my mind is going there, which is a wonderful thing, because out of that experience, we become very humble. People will say, wow, you're a meditator. And then we can say, yeah, I'm a meditator. If only you knew my meditation, you know? And that's where we become suitably humble. So that's a wonderful thing. It would be terrible if we were successful meditators right from the start. We'd be unbearable. We'd be like so high and wonderful and spiritual. So luckily, we are humbly aware of how the mind is distracted. So that's where we can start with, as Pema Chodron says, we start where we are. But of course, the purpose is, with the shamatha, familiarization, that we then begin to come back more and more and gain some stability. But the stability and the whole process is actually oriented around this analysis that sees what is happening with my mind. And that's where we know, I'm focusing, but then I'm thinking about dinner, you know, sort of. So, beginning shamatha experience, the claim of such Abhidharma analysis is that this account of channel firing is a fair profile of how things are occurring for us all the time. Becoming aware of how such channel firings work might be compared to the kind of dawning meditative experience, the kind of beginning shamatha experience. To give an example used in many Tibetan Buddhist traditions, imagine that your shamatha practice is to stare at the white letter R. Now, staring generally implies sort of a rather fixed approach. I would say a little bit gentler than staring. You could say just having the R as your reference point. So Steven studied with Chogyal Namkhanobu, and in Namkhanobu's tradition, then very much shamatha was practiced in conjunction with looking at the white letter R. And this also is something that's quite common within the Dzogchen tradition. Other practices might involve looking at external objects, for example, a blue flower. It might involve looking at a Buddha statue. It might involve meditating and thinking of a Buddha in front of us. So this is where our then focus is on one particular object, in this case, the white letter R. There is an external fixation, a meditation with an object. You are looking at that R with your eyes open. Before you settled into the shamatha, your back was preoccupying you a bit, or to use Abhidharma language, you are having some intermittent channel 5 firings. So channel 5 is the body, right? So there we are, we're going to sit down and meditate, and then there's, at the same time, there's sort of a discomfort in the back. And that's where we're actually going from the visual to the tactile perception. So then he says, then maybe some people were making noise, channel 2 firing, so that you could not concentrate. But then finally you hit the target and were able to focus on that channel 1. So the shamatha practitioner learns how to stay on the chosen channel broadcast, in this case channel 1, and regards other channels as distractions from which program they want to tune into. So essentially here, in the context of then shamatha practice focusing on the syllable a in a physical form in front, is then what we that we associate with channel 1, and basically staying on that channel. In the case diagrammed above, one is able to stay with the chosen object for 3 successive moments. So that's going back to that, the sort of the initial where we had 1, meaning eyes, and eye, for 3 moments. So it didn't last long. So that's sort of probably corresponds to my kind of meditation, which is sort of, if I'm lucky, I might have 3 moments without getting distracted, and then I'm sort of wondering what's for dinner, or that was a nice smell, or etc., etc.
So you have a question about that. So how do you define moments here if you're having the same channel on fire and to those moments? What distinguishes one moment from the next in this way of looking at moments?
Yeah, look, we had last time we were talking. So the question is, how do we identify the moments here? Are we talking seconds, or are we talking those famous 1/64th of a millisecond, right? Yeah. Hard to say. So essentially, it's more just the you could say the understanding that we're staying for, let's just say, seconds. I think just as a working formula right now, we can just say seconds. We're on it for, or maybe just a couple of seconds. But I think the model with the 64 parts of a microsecond, that has more to do with what we actually can do. Because I'm looking at you, and I'm also thinking about your question, and I'm also hearing myself speak, and I'm also hearing the whirring of the projector, and I'm smelling a bit of dal or whatever rice cooking. So all of that gives me the impression that it's all happening at once. But it is actually these you could say moments of going back and forth between the various channels. So I think just for a working sort of just we can just work with the idea that it's a couple of seconds when we talk about these moments here. Yeah.
And then the other thing is, when they separate out column 1 as the organ of perception, from a neuroscience point of view, you would say those firings are happening simultaneously. It's awareness resting on that firing activity constitutes that break in attention, or moving from one to the next.
Okay, but then you would still operate with the notion of a subject and an object, right?
You would, and so the thing is, where the processing is parallel is when you have all the input coming in, but it's binary when it's attention resting on one after the other.
Okay, so but you still would deconstruct it in various aspects, right? Yeah. So that actually is fine. As far as Abhidharma is concerned, we're just interested in beginning to become aware of the
I figured it's just when he uses the language fire, and that's where it makes it sound like
logical,
but anyway.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, we know Steven has a weakness for for some of the language drawn from science. Yeah. Which is good. Anyway, yes. So once again, myself as a streaming. So then what we mean here is that there's a continuity that gives the impression of something that's solid and ongoing. In this way of analysis, staying with the object means staying with it for more than simply a glimpse. The term streaming is used not only to name the experiential flow of staying with the chosen object of focus, but also for any segment of this bit of experience. So this is you could say this is similar to the approach that we would find in I guess what you're saying in your neuroscience, right? Yeah. Just identifying different components, really. Yeah. Now, one can make a distinction between a pre-smashed and a post-smash sense of permanent self. Okay, this is where we again flirting with the notion of colliders and so forth, which essentially here just means analyzed, right? So there's before we analyze it and then after we analyze it. So when we have the normal sense of permanent self, that's pre-smashed. That's just sort of on our face value. They say, there's me, right? I'm just experiencing this. But the moment that we have the post-smashed sense of permanent self, that's where we've analyzed. We've actually interjected this moment of analysis or prajna that begins to deconstruct the components of this experience. So that's where initially we just think self and object, but then we begin to see that this self is constituted on the basis of a number of different components. So a pre-mashed individual's discernment is rather dormant. It is not operated at full capacity. And that sense of a permanent self is still mostly intact. A post-smashed individual's discernment, however, is characterized by experiencing the breaking up of the permanence of the self. So that's where we operate both in terms of the 18 dhatus that are taking place, all the various components, but also we analyze whether this self is singular, whether it is unconditional, whether it's permanent, and so forth. So that's where post just means that we've subjected it to the standard analysis, really. Now, but of course, what we're talking about with this subject, something that has been subjected to analysis, is then that there's the component of vipassana. We're no longer deceived, we're no longer fooled. So that's where this has enormous value. So, staying without distraction with one channel, what we call being undistracted. In the previous example, there were 3 moments of staying with the visual objects, followed by 6 moments of channel 6. And then for moment 10, a return of sorts to seeing, that is direct seeing. So we have these 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, then we have 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, and then we have finally a 1 again. So the purpose of focus, of shamatha, was achieved in 4 out of 10 moments or frames. That is 40% shamatha practitioner. That's very nice. So that's where, again, coming back to the fact that anybody who's ever meditated for a moment in their life, they will know, you come out of meditation and, well, you have sort of a rough idea how many percent you actually were on, and Sanskrit Rinpoche, he's always very generous in his humility, and he will generally be the first to say that he was lucky if he even had like 2 or 5 seconds of not being distracted, So in some way, there's very much a margin for accommodating the fact that we're not going to be perfect meditators. There's 2,000 years of experience that shows that for beginners, we are expected to be distracted. So even here, 40%, not so bad. So he says, and the technical term for what was going on in those 6 moments is distraction. We should actually have questionnaires here. How much were you distracted? We could give prizes to the ones who are most distracted. And the whole meditation actually stands around distraction and non-distraction. When we say shamatha, that we are essentially operating with this non-distraction. That's essentially what we do with shamatha. What we could be undistracted, but then we could also go into a zone where we're just numb, and that also is undistracted, but that's not particularly desirable. Yeah, Andrew?
I was just wondering, could we consider distractions as a hint?
Well, the moment that we know it's a distraction, we're no longer distracted. So you could say, yes, it's a hint. Like, here I am distracted. Thank you. There's an intelligence actually at that moment of realizing I'm distracted. Actually, some of the great teachers of meditation, they would say that moment that you recognize you're distracted, that's like gold. Because it's an instant where there's clarity, and what follows is actually us beginning to embellish on that and just saying, oh, now I'm not distracted, now I'm not distracted, now I'm not distracted. And that's partly the mind, that's partly us having something we fixate on. But that initial moment of recognizing that we're not, that we're no longer focused, that actually is completely non-conceptual and a naked moment of just insight. So that's hugely valuable.
I like what you said in the past, Jakob, like when there is a noise and whatever.
Yeah.
That, in fact, you should thank it for. We once used to do meditation over in Brunswick Heads, and for a period of time there was this teenage hip hop class on this wooden floorboards right next door.
It was always start, as soon as we sat down to meditate, they would begin their class, you know.
Like it was going, it was wonderful.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, out here we completely forget to emphasize that. And of course, yeah, we were just reminiscing where we used to meditate in Brunswick Head. It was next to the RSL where there were hip hop dance classes going on while we were doing meditation. And actually, an important point of meditation, particularly then in the Vajrayana context, is that we welcome that. We welcome noise. You know, in some traditions you're supposed to have complete peace and you can't, shouldn't be disturbed and so on. But actually, from the Vajrayana point of view, we don't really care if there's noise or not. It's more that you're not distracted. So, large thumping noises or screeching or white cockatoos or whatever, perfect.
So Jakob, some of those sixes might not be discursive thought. Some of the sixes up there might not be discursive thought.
Well, if we're aware, but then again, if our object of meditation is an external object that's identified by the eye or perceived by the eye, then the moment we're lost in thought, the attention goes to that. It would be distraction by definition.
So no half points available.
No half points available here. But you could, of course, say if you're aware of the thoughts that you're having, sure. But for the time being, we're just simply identifying how the mind shifts between these various channels. So, according to Abhidharma analysis, shamatha practice is learning at the level of experience to stay focused on a specific channel. Don't you remember in the 60s and 70s when TM came out and they were talking about how we only use 10% of our mental capacity, and if we could use 100%, we could levitate, and I don't know what. There was all these, there was a general sense that this incredible focus was, an objective in itself. So, and that's also what we're operating with here. If we are using a visual focus, it is learning how to stay with channel 1. That is to say, it is learning how to extend the number of continuous channel 1 moments with no distracting intermixture of any other channels. Here is a diagram of 10 moments of channel 1 focus. There you go. When you note that you are no longer focused on the desired channel, that is called being distracted. The capacity to remain focused is called mindfulness, smriti, or dzemba. And the capacity to note that you are distracted and then able to return to the chosen focus is called alertness, or in Tibetan, shishin. Okay, right. Anyway, these are the two basic components. Sometimes you have this, you have in the, I don't know, we haven't stuck it up here. You have that famous chart that shows a practitioner charging after the elephant, where the elephant, the black elephant, symbolizes you could say, the agitated mind. And the person has essentially, what's it called again? The mahout has this thing, it's called anyway, a hook, right? Terrible thing. Animal lovers don't like this. And then a lasso, right? It's this thing you just show it to the elephant and then it's terrified. But it's like a hook. And there you would say the alertness comes from that, just waving that around. There's a sense of coming back. You know what it is you're doing when you're meditating, you're motivated and so on. And the actual being on the spot, being present, is then the mindfulness. And that's what then is symbolized by the lasso. So you have these two. So you have, yeah, ankusha, I think it's called, and then also the lasso. Anyway, these two are really the two tools that we use in shamatha practice. It is the mind that knows what's going on, and then there's the mindfulness that's on the spot. And it's the mindfulness that is on the spot that we refer to as undistracted. So we're on to the blue flower, we're on to the visualization, we're on to whatever it is. That's with the mindfulness. And then we have the awareness, or sometimes Padmakara, they translate it with vigilant introspection. And Ziga Control also uses that word. And there's different ways of translating it. But basically, it is then that which knows what's going on in the mind. And that's where we go. When we get up from meditation, we would know, well, I was distracted for 90% of the time. I was alert or present for maybe 10% of the time. So that's where, so with these two, it involves learning how to become aware that you are distracted. In the parlance of mindfulness instructions, this is called bringing your mind back, or bringing awareness back to the meditative focus. Now, this we need to know as meditators. This is where we become conscious. And we shouldn't really be concerned about anything else as meditators. At least when we're learning to meditate, this is really what it's about. It's either we're on or we're not. And what's on is the non-distracted quality, and the one that knows that we're on off, that's then the alertness or the awareness.
Yeah,
Yeah?
say something about sometimes like stories pretty like that state of non-conceptual.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, leaving this back because I'm thinking non-conceptual, so I'm being unconceptualizing, non-conceptual.
Yeah, yeah.
I start going
Yeah,
down the rabbit hole.
yeah.
With that actual state,
Yeah.
it's tricky about the actual analysis getting in the way.
Yeah.
You know, back to the breath is even.
So the question is, when we're meditating, then we do have the thought, oh, I'm meditating, or I'm aware of what's going on, but then again, right now I'm not having any thoughts. But that's a thought, isn't it, right? And so there's this sort of like rather incestuous, the awareness of the awareness of the awareness, etc. Right? So that goes on infinite sort of. But look, at the end of the day, that's where it's lucky, because as meditators, we just call that thinking, and we just come back to the breath. So that's why it's good to have that's, see, we might think that having the object of the breath, we sometimes poo-poo that a little bit, saying, oh yeah, that's shamatha with the reference point. We should sort of be without reference point, right? And there's Dzogchen and Mahamudra instructions of just being without reference point and all of that. But the thing is, when you come back to the breath, that's actually the shortcut to having no concepts, because that's just awareness of the breath. We're just coming back to the practice. We're no longer philosophizing about practice. So that's where there's a big difference between thinking about practice and then practicing. And coming back to the breath, it enables us to just be practicing rather than thinking about practice. Of course, what we're doing here with the analysis, that's what we call analytical meditation. That's a little bit different. That's just noticing what's happening within the mind. So that's something we do after we're meditating or before we're meditating. It's just understanding how the mind operates. But when we're meditating, we're just on the like we see here, like he had in the previous one. He had this, just ideally it would look like that. Moment one, we're on the eye consciousness all the way through. So this is where we just stick to that. So, but that's essentially, right now we're talking about the theory of meditation. The meditation itself is just coming back to the breath. So that's where, when we begin to think, oh, am I meditating, or rather, am I having no thought? It's like when we say, oh yeah, I had a non-conceptual experience. Well, it's still being conceptualized, right? So non-conceptual experience doesn't even particularly come with the label non-conceptual. We know what it is, we have an idea what it is, but it actually, we couldn't objectify non-conceptual experience. It's like Jigme Lingpa, he says, the one that knows what's happening is still the tight grip of the ego. So we are still objectifying, we're still operating with duality. But the beautiful thing is, we actually, when we're meditating, we don't really need to analyze. We can analyze now. From 5 to 6 on Mondays, we analyze. From 6:30 onwards, you're free of analysis. You can go chuck it out the window. Don't need to analyze anymore. You know. That's also why, that's the wonderful thing about meditators. Meditators, they're a very simple lot. Meditation is beautiful. Of course, we, coming from our analytical culture and so on, we use a lot of time thinking about these things. Then we talk about it, but meditation itself, and we see this if you come across meditators, very simple, very innocent. Sometimes we think childish, but not really. It's just that there's not too much complication going on. Doesn't mean they're stupid though. Just means, things are fairly straightforward. Yeah.
Is it correct that the Buddha had this special ability from time to time just to point to the moon to someone, and then bang, they got enlightened?
Yes, they were there. Is it true that the Buddha had this ability to just point out enlightenment? Yes, we have that in the tradition. In some traditions, we would just talk about how the Buddha just showed a flower and somebody just got it, And we have that also in the Dzogchen tradition, actually. There's stories about, remember Nyoshu Khenpo, he would tell stories about how somebody went to their teacher and said, please, I'd like to receive teachings on meditation. And this master just says, so how is your mind? And the student just went, oh, thank you. And then the teacher would say, okay, just maintain that. End of the story. So there are instances like that. So it says, then there's a question, staying focused on a specific channel during shamatha, does that include all 6 channels or does it exclude channel 6? No, it doesn't exclude channel 6. We could stay focused if we're mindful. For example, if we're visualizing, it actually operates on channel 6. You're visualizing the Buddha like we do actually. That's channel 6. So yes. Recognizing which channel is firing. Let's see here. Is another one? Oh yeah. On this point, is aware of awareness something that can be said is an object of mindfulness? Not really. I mean, the thing is, like I was saying, there's sort of there's an infinite regress that could take place where we're just aware of the awareness, right? But then there's an awareness of which we are aware. And then we're aware of the awareness that is aware. And then we're aware of the awareness that is aware of the awareness that is aware, etc., right? So we could have this, so we just cut through that. Just come back to the breath. It just becomes a head spinner, If there is no watcher, which channel is firing? Oh yeah, there is a watcher. There's an awareness. But the thing is that awareness is not in any way particularly, you can say, located in the sense of being an object as such. So we're just aware of what's taking place. So we're aware of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Of course, we could say, yes, it's the mind that's aware of the mind. So, so for the time being, let's just for the time being, just for simplicity, we'd say the watcher is channel 6. Yeah, but it's also the watcher that knows what's going on. Yeah. So, the reason why channel 1 is used so often in many Buddhist traditions of mental calmness training is because it's the most powerful and robust of the channels. It's said that it's much easier to note the difference between channel 1 and channel 6 than, for example, channel 5 and channel 6. All right. So to know the difference between the visual object and the tactile object, and then mind is what he's saying. It's easier to identify the difference between these two than it is between visual object and mind than it is to recognize the difference between touch and mind, because touch is much more intimate, much more subtle. Probably we can. This is not saying that you can't do it. It's not like sort of a mystical experience to know the difference between touch and mind, but still, it is much more. Actually, also what Steven was talking about earlier, also the proximity. Channel 1 is further away, 2 closer, 3 closer, 4 closer, 5. 5 is sitting right at the level of the skin, right? The taste is something that's still there, but still slightly further, and then smell and so forth. So there's sort of you could say, a hierarchy of proximity. So the object of the eye is further away than the object of, say, the tactile perception. So the entire schema called data analysis has as its purpose a particular conclusion with respect to having smashed apart this tight self. So yes, it basically identifies the complexity of this self, the constructed nature of this self that we ordinarily think of as one solid self, and in fact is constituted by all the various aspects of experience. So we want the self to break apart in such a way that we will come to know the difference between channel 6 and any of the other channels. That is to say, we will no longer confuse channel 1 to 5 with channel 6. We will no longer confuse moments of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching with remembering that we saw something or producing that image in our mind's eye. Now it might sound fairly obvious, but in a way it is actually significant, because we very often think of something as if it was real. And it elicits this sense of it being something very real, when in fact it is just within the mind. We have a memory of something that we dislike, and all of a sudden we react as if it was actually there. So that's where we want to be aware that this is just the mind. It's not the real thing. So that's, again, this is where we differ vastly from Western psychology, where we very often talk about traumas that have to do with experiences that existed in the past and so on. And all of that is valid, but we just need to know that this is in fact something that is taking place within just the mind's eye. So it's very different from the real thing. So again, identifying then the constructed nature of this is what frees us. We will, he says, be able to know the difference between channel 1 when we're actually looking at something, for example, the gray rectangle, and a subsequent moment of closing one's eyes and creating that gray rectangle in one's mind. So we might actually think, hey, this is the gray rectangle. I can remember it. I'm seeing it. You know, I'm looking at the projector right now. I'm looking away, and then I'm thinking of the projector, and I have a completely clear perception of the projector in my mind. But it's actually not just, it's just memory, it's just thought. So we train, Steven says, ourselves to precisely note the different channels are operating. For most people, that is for non-meditators, those who do not practice shamatha and who do not slow down and take a good look at their minds, if they were to do this analysis of 10 moments of what they called seeing, there would be 1 or 2 moments of seeing, then moments of thinking about what they saw, then moments of seeing, then moments of thinking about what they saw. You know, this happens, right? You know, I always think of this example. If you go to a restaurant and you buy a dish that costs $180, and and then you taste the first bite, right? And then you sit talking about when you had another meal and how good that was. And actually, you're not any longer tasting the meal that you're having. You know, you might have paid a fortune. This is so good, and it reminds me of that other fantastic meal that I had way back. You know, etc. And we're not tasting any longer. We're just, you know. So this is where we operate within this very, very vacuous situation of just not being present. So that's where he's giving these moments, right? There's a 1, there's a 1, there's a 6, there's a 6, there's a 6, there's a 1, there's a 6, there's a 1, there's a 6, there's a 1. So we're basically going back and forth between just seeing and thinking about it. It's like we go to, I remember pondering this, you know, I went to Grand Canyon, right? And then you look at the Grand Canyon. That's great, you know, fantastic. And then you're just standing there thinking, I'm looking at the Grand Canyon. And it's sort of like you almost go, don't say it, but so what? You know, this is, I mean, you know, honestly, it's like, and you know, you take the helicopter tour or whatever, you know, and it's yeah, it's fantastic. But then again, you know, it's just something you're seeing, right? But then you're supposed to sort of get all wound up about it. Wow, I'm seeing the Grand Canyon, you know, so on. Anyway. Actually, a friend of mine, they had a tradition in their family, mainly the men though. Whenever they came to a fantastic place, they'd always pee. You know, when there was a great view, they'd sort of pee. That was their way of celebrating great spectacular vistas, you know.
My girlfriend went to Niagara Falls and just needed to have a wee the whole time.
Yeah. There you go. So she was having a lot of 1s, and then she would have tactile perception, right? She would have a lot of 5s. Back to the 1, but back to the 5. So if you ask them what they were doing, they would say, with a complete clean conscience, I was looking at something. And that's right. We would say, I'm looking at something, but actually we're not. We're thinking about looking at something. Happens a lot. So as for every one of those 10 moments, it in fact was, you know, as if it was 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, but it's not. Not only were they experientially lying to us, they were lying to themselves. That lie is another way of understanding what Buddhists call the permanent sense of a self. Okay, lie is a strong word, but I mean, it's just, you could say, inaccurate. It's just not accurate. We think we're looking at something, but in fact, we're also thinking about it. I remember also going to concerts, you know, and there you are, you're listening to this sublime music, and you catch yourself just daydreaming and just thinking about things. And, you know, there you are, you know, your favorite band or whatever it might be, and you're actually distracted half the time. You know? Anyway, so what Steven is saying here is that there is just this unconsciousness that you could say, in the absence of analysis, is where we perpetuate this sense of a permanent self. So Vasubandhu suggests that the reason why this entire Dhatu analysis was used was to help us note the difference between when we're on channel 6 and when we're on any other channel. This is why, perhaps to your disappointment, there is not too much concern with the content of experience, what is going on in channel 6. It is as if only an amateur is concerned with content. The superior practitioner is aware of what the channel is. It's enough to know what frequency one is on. And that, of course, is, again, very different from analysis as we have it in Western psychology, where we would be very much concerned on what's going on and analyzing it and, you know, objectifying it and putting language onto it and so on and so on. Whereas the meditator would just say, well, that's just thought, you know, big deal, you know. I remember I can't remember if it was Tricycle or Shambhala-san. There's the meditator who's on the couch next to, you know, the Freudian analysis and, you know, analyst, the psychologist, right? You know, we know this because he has the, you know, the prerequisite, what's it called, certificate diploma up on the wall, right? So you have the couch and the diploma and the man sitting on the chair next to him, and he says to the patient, "What do you mean you just label thoughts thinking?" You know, which is This is our standard Buddhist approach to thoughts. It doesn't matter what comes up, you just label it thinking, which of course would be rather disappointing if you said to your, your, what do you call analyst? An analyst? Yeah, you say to your analyst, yeah, I'm just having thoughts. Yeah, but what are they? Well, I don't care. They're just thoughts. What do you care, mate? It's like, get out. So in that sense, the practitioner has a different approach than an ordinary person. So this is where that we're just aware that this is thought, and we're essentially just about not being distracted. So, ha ha ha. There's a comment here from the virtual audience.
I'm glad they're enjoying it too.
Huh?
I'm glad they're enjoying it too.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yes, I can report the live studio audience, they were also amused. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? Unless we could just, there's a few minutes left. Let's just go on a bit. One moment of seeing, being with the field. So remember, there are three energy packets, dhatus, cooperating together in order for there to be one moment of experience. But we do not have access to these three energy packets at the level of experience. At the level of experience, we just have a moment of seeing. So that's where we just think I'm seeing, but actually this is where we then analyze and we can see this is constituted by subject, object, and perception. For example, if we're looking at the great rectangle that is channel 1, the homework was to see if you could note the difference between directly and non-conceptually being with the hue and the configuration of a visual field, channel 1, and thinking about it, channel 6. The claim is that with mindfulness practice, we can have many consecutive moments of experience in a non-conceptual way. We can be tuned in to the sensual givenness and actual experiential presence of that field of awareness. Now, this is actually interesting because we could say, and this is also something that comes up in Western epistemology, are we really seeing the object, or are we just seeing our version, our way of filtering a particular object in relation to the object? I'm looking at the projector. But then again, that's very caught up with my whole, shtick around the projector. There's thoughts about the projector. And so am I really seeing the projector? There is the object out there. There's my eye that's focused on it. And on the basis of that, I have an image of projector in my mind. But does that image correspond to the actual object out there? We would say, and just for the argument, we just say, okay, that's a non-conceptual experience, seeing the projector, whereas if I'm looking away and thinking the projector, that is a conceptual experience. So that's where we would say the perceptions themselves, in and of themselves, are non-conceptual. Then we would say there comes the second moment, but we would sometimes say that second moment comes very quickly. There's the object, and then I remember actually as a kid noticing that there's a moment between that you see something and you know what it is, but then there's the mind. And I remember thinking, gosh, the mind is slow. There's that knowing, but then there's like, then comes the language, then that's the projector. Yeah.
I was listening to Ricochet
Uh-huh.
today, and just that first thing, like, thus I have heard.
Mm-hmm.
And as he was explaining, like, it doesn't say the Buddha said.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, so thus, because people have heard the same thing on very many different levels.
Yeah.
I find that really interesting.
Yeah, same thing really. The Buddha said something, whatever he said, but there's so many different perceptions of it. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And I never really noticed that, like, I mean, you assume the Buddha said, but they're always saying, thus I have heard. Like,
Yeah.
or this, that, and the other. And he was saying all the different ways different people could see what those words were.
Yeah.
From something sublime.
Yeah.
Very simple.
Yeah. Absolutely. Everybody would actually hear something different. And that's why we would say the Buddha's capacity is also that people would hear it according to their abilities, but also sometimes we would even say the language. The Buddha is speaking, but everybody would hear it in their own particular vernacular. Yeah. Yeah. So the claim is that with mindfulness practice, we can have many consecutive moments of experience in a non-conceptual way. We can be tuned into the sensual givenness and actual experiential presence of that field of awareness. Okay, see. I was wondering if we could close the door. It's getting a little bit nippy in here. So, what can be said when one has the experience, yet the projector fails to really solidify the experience with a tight definition or response? Well, this is interesting, but that's exactly what we're saying here, is that you might not have a tight definition. You know, what is it again? The first fleet arriving in Botany Bay, right? And couldn't be seen because there was not a tight definition. Or we're seeing something that we just can't really put our finger on. So that happens. And that's, again, you could say, a non-conceptual experience. We just experience some object. We can't verbalize it. That happens. But that is, in fact, Steven's point here, that at that moment there is non-conceptual. So that is what happens. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
About the grey rectangle?
Yes.
So well, for example, when it was projected on the screen, when you're looking at the grey rectangle, there's also a whole bunch of other stuff in the visual field.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, is it just a percentage game? What's happening? Because, you know, it's not that if you're, well, I don't know, is it if you're 100% focused on the grey rectangle with, you know, all of the thought moments or perceptual moments, you know, obviously, does everything else fall away? That's kind of what I'm saying.
Actually, that might be interesting. Let's see where this next chapter goes. But you know what Stephen was, so the question is, when we look at the gray rectangle, are we actually seeing the gray rectangle? Because we're also seeing all sorts of other things, right? What is really happening? And we would say that we think gray rectangle, but in fact, we're just looking at all sorts of different things that constitute that. We're looking at the upper part, the lower part, and so forth. I remember once one Lama, Chikanima Rinpoche, he said to someone, if you can see my face in one moment, I'll prostrate naked all the way down to the Buddha, to the Bodhnath Stupa. Because in fact, we look at a face and we're looking at the mouth, we're looking at part of the mouth, we're looking at the forehead, the nose, the ears, and so on. We're actually never seeing the single object in a single moment. It's basically patched together by, you know, a very fragmented experience of all sorts of different elements. But we identify it as a singular object. That's why we label it in a singular way, right? But in fact, it is just, yeah.
So that's why then the Vipassana comes in.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, let's see what comes up next time. It might be something to that effect that's going to be said here, but we will see. Cliffhanger. Ta-da. What comes next? All right. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. 2-minute break. So just a few words on the practice of meditation. So with the practice of meditation, we are never importing something. We are essentially connecting with what we overlook. We're stuck in our heads with regards to these perceptions that we have that elicit particular experiences that we can then fixate on, and that we very often, it runs as a sort of an undertow throughout our entire experience. We're actually walking through life, but we're all the time having these moods, these attitudes, these underlying thoughts that actually have nothing to do with reality. We're thinking, I like so-and-so, I don't like so-and-so, this happened to me, this might happen to me. All of that has nothing to do with what's actually going on. So we're actually not in touch. We're not denying that this is elicited by particular experiences in the past and all of that. But that's beside the point. It has nothing to do with the actual reality and where we are. So the purpose of meditation is essentially to bring us back to where we actually are. So this practice of meditation, as much as it sounds very esoteric, very profound, very otherworldly, it is in fact nothing but it is the most worldly thing we could do. We're normally caught up in otherworldliness. We're normally caught up in abstractions. When we sit and have conversations with people, we're talking about things that are entirely not there. They're entirely fabrications in our heads. We're not actually touching on reality. We think we're discussing reality, but we're really just conjuring up imaginations, and we're solidifying labels and attitudes and so forth that actually really sit as a toxic veil that actually prevents us from being properly in relationship with reality. So we're continually cluttering up reality with all this addiction to our labels and so forth. What we're doing with meditation is actually sobering up. We're connecting with reality. We're coming back to being present. And that this works, we can actually see in why we're attracted to sages, is because it's almost as if we would say, there's finally a sensible person on the planet. We meet the Dalai Lama and finally there's a normal person. They're not all completely nuts. And so that's where there's a delight in the sage. So the object of meditation and the spirit and you could say, whole exercise of meditating has nothing to do with removing ourselves from the world, but it has actually everything to do with us coming into the world or coming into touch with reality. And also, what this provides an opportunity to do is actually for us to extract ourselves of our ordinary imaginary world. We're not actually touching the world, but we're operating with an imaginary world. In the Yogacaryan tradition, we talk about mind as the dependent nature. This dependent nature can fall into the imaginary, or it can actually free itself. So we talk about the three natures. This is the Yogacaryans. Homage to the Yogacaryans. They are the coolest. So because they map the mind. I mean, the Majamicans, they'll just say it's all just, it's all just emptiness. It's all just, it's all just dependent arising and emptiness. And there's nothing there really, But the Yogacaryans, they're the scientists. They go in and actually begin to say, what is actually happening here? And what we refer to as the ordinary experience of our so-called real world is what we call the imaginary nature. That's where we label things as solid in particular ways, and on the basis of that, we then have all these reactions. We like and we dislike, and on the basis of our likes and our dislikes, then we have happiness, we have suffering, and so on. So the vipassana, what we're supplying here in terms of this, what is it again? What is it? Pre-smash and post-smash. What is it again? The accelerator. The accelerator of that smashes our assumptions is this exercise of actually providing analysis into what we're doing, seeing. Now, analysis doesn't mean rumination and sitting and pondering and getting philosophical. It's just saying, is this real or not? It's just providing that critical analysis that investigates, is there anything there? And actually there isn't. There's a lot of conditions there. And that's always what we come back to in the Buddhist teaching. We come back to the fact that we analyze and we can't actually find an essence. That always happens, inevitably. We would say there's nothing that can withstand analysis. The moment that we begin to ask questions, and everybody would agree on this, we come up with complexity. Complexity is so annoying, isn't it? Because that's why we can't just make simplistic notions like they're good, they're bad, you know, he's good, she's bad. It just doesn't work. Whenever we analyze, we come up against complexity. And that is the place where we begin to see how invalid our judgmental mind is, how invalid and invalidating these toxic states of mind actually are. And that's why we realize something needs to be done. I'm labeling my experience, my life, my conscious experience, my moods, and so on, as solid in one particular way. And that's where Vipassana is very helpful. But Vipassana, unless it's hooked up with shamatha and non-distraction, it just becomes philosophy. We can sit and do like I'm doing now. I can just blah, 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 endlessly. But it's not really going to help me. It's not really going to lead to anything. It's just more blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, we can have discussions about this blah, blah. And then we can come up again saying, isn't it interesting how complex it is? And then again, we could conclude, well, there isn't actually any reality to this. And then we can talk about that. So we can endlessly discuss things, but it's actually only the moment that we sit down and we actually allow ourselves to experience this, you could say, discontinuation or not tagging along with our ways of solidifying our moods, our experiences, our attitudes, and so on. The moment that we practice shamatha, it's a moment where we actually, the moment that we just come back to the breath, the moment that we just come back to channel 1 or channel 5, whichever channel you'd like, then we begin to have a discontinuation of this unconscious distracted state that we just tag along with ordinarily. And that's where shamatha is essential for us to really actually achieve vipassana. That's one of the famous lines from chapter 8 in the Way of the Bodhisattva that highlights really that vipassana needs to be joined up with this shamatha. I can't remember the lines exactly, I apologize. Anyway, so these two components of calm abiding that comes together with then insight, this is really what we in Buddhism call meditation. So for us to now graduate from just talking about things to actually engage in connecting with just being present, achieving calm of mind, then we have methods then for achieving that, which is then what we in modern day parlance call mindfulness, and which we in the Buddhist tradition refer to as shamatha, calm abiding, which is essentially sustaining undistracted focus. Now again, this undistracted focus doesn't necessarily mean sort of going into trance or going into some otherworldly condition. It doesn't necessarily even entail what we call jhanas or deep levels of absorption. It really just entails that we're not deceived or distracted by the ordinary conceptual mind. So in that way, the approach to shamatha, particularly then from a Vajrayana angle, is very light. It's really just enabling us to be aware that we have thoughts and then just coming back to being present. So we sustain presence through awareness of, in this context, we would say the breath. So as we're meditating, we have three aspects, which is the physical posture. And that's again where, please, we have chairs here. If you're suffering and you need to sit on a chair, if you've recently broken bones or in general you in any way are not comfortable sitting on the floor, there's absolutely, it's not as if there's anything particularly as you could say, there's a hierarchy that chairs is not as good as sitting on the floor. So the main thing really is that we begin to relate to our body fully in terms of just sitting quietly. So we have this practice of physical posture, that where we adopt, we would sometimes talk about the 7 postures, or the 7-fold posture of Virchana, which is then sitting, then hands on the knees or in the lap. We take the shoulders slightly back, we take our chin in, we relax the jaw, we lower the gaze. And that constitutes the physical aspect. Basically, we sit like the Buddha. Now, as we sit like that, and this provides an excellent container, we have physical calm, and it's also really important to recognize that with meditation, we regard the body as a great boon. We regard the body as something that enables us to stay grounded, to relate to our body, to feel the body, to be settled in the body. We would say meditation really is to keep the mind in the body. So there's not as if there's some sort of notion that we should just discorporate and proceed to something greater and higher that has nothing to do with the body. We're very much in the body. So taking the body as the reference point, it provides really the place of grounding and the foundation for mindfulness. The more subtle aspect of mindfulness is then the focusing the mind, which ordinarily just is all over the shop. We normally are going after one thing after the other, and we might not know that. And that's again where this Dhatu analysis, this Abhidharma analysis, is so helpful. We begin to become aware how actually our mind operates. It goes here, we hear a sound, we smell something, we think something. There's all the time the mind going for various objects, and we become aware of that. And that's where we then are able to bring the mind back to the breath as the object, knowing that is where we're placing the mind. So in this case, it's something that is quite tactile. It is partly number 5, it's partly number 6, because it is that we're imagining the breath. We can't see it. We have some sense, and we know the breath is going out. So that's number 5. That's tactile perception. But then there's also the mind that knows this. So there is this component of the mind and the tactile perception. But either way, this is what we anchor the mind with. This is what we come back to. We don't have to worry about anything particular. With meditation, we never need to worry about anything. We're not going for some particular state. People who don't know about meditation, they think meditation is going into particular zones. But we know better. We know 95% of the time we're just thinking about conversations we had, or worries that we're having, or what's for dinner, or blah, blah. So the reality of our condition is very real. There's nothing otherworldly about the practice of meditation. So what we're doing to a large extent is begin to anchoring us into being present by coming back to something that we've decided that's going to be the object of our meditation. And that in this case is the breath. We are determined to just come back in a light way, but that is nevertheless the point of reference is the out-breath. We go out with the breath, it dissolves into space, and without any real concern about the in-breath, then again, we're aware of the out-breath as it goes out, gap, and again, awareness of the out-breath. So this is what we're doing. Now, in doing that, we have a mind that is focused in being present. And this is where we also know, am I distracted, am I not? How much was I with the out-breath? How much was I sort of thinking about all sorts of other things? So this is a very real thing. This is not dreamy or mystical. It's incredibly real. It's just like if we're driving, we know if we're distracted or not distracted. It's very real. Now, what's particular about meditation is that we're beginning to have a little bit, you could say, less reverence. We're less submissive. We're less controlled by the undertow of thoughts, where the thoughts very much shape our moods, our attitudes, our beliefs and so on, that's where the ordinary way that we are just tagged along, dragged along, controlled by the mind is actually something that we are somewhat, you could say there's a bit of a rebellion taking place. We say enough's enough. We've been fooled, deceived by, and just controlled by these narratives of the mind, the attitudes of the mind, the beliefs of the mind. And while these thoughts that we have, they can be very useful in terms of just, doing accounts, taxes, knowing what we need to do, etc. But when we're meditating, this is actually a place where we can take a break. This is where meditation becomes very refreshing. So that's where, for meditators, if they're tired, then what they do then is they meditate. When you meditate, you become refreshed. If you're not so good at meditating and you think meditation is something where you're doing all sorts of things, then you'll say, oh my God, I can't meditate. I'm so tired. But if you understand what we're actually doing with meditation, it's something that refreshes us because it takes us out of our heads. If we're so entangled in our heads, then thinking about meditation is like, oh, it's too much. I can't meditate. I'm tired. But if we actually have this freshness of meditation as something that we've familiarized ourselves with, we know that whenever we sit down and meditate, this is a place where we just find peace. That's just where we come back to the simplicity of not tagging along with the ordinary grip of our narratives and our thoughts and so forth. So that's where we free ourselves from the ordinary ruminations. So meditation is coming back to this condition of mindfulness in which we are less submissive and less controlled by the thoughts. The thoughts are allowed to be there. And we could even say the moment that there are thoughts that arise, it's a spark of the mind. It has a quality, but we should just touch it. We should just be aware of it and then let it go. So we're aware of what's happening in the mind, but we're not distracted by that. So that's where this quality of non-distraction is so invigorating, so refreshing. And that's where the meditator draws their strength. We call the food of samadhi. If you read Milarepa's songs, he didn't have a very fancy cuisine, as we know. He basically just had nettles. but he was very nourished by the food of samadhi, this non-distracted condition. So this is what we do. Now, what we do in terms of setting the quality of meditation, we could very much see ourselves in a very depressed way in terms of our situation or whatever. And that's where we can extract ourselves from that. Again, these are just imaginary projections that we're subscribing to. And that's normal. So taking that into consideration, that we will very often be controlled by the way that we think of our world and so forth, it's very helpful to, before we settle into meditation, to engage some way of lifting ourselves. So in all the various traditions, we recite scriptures or something that lifts us. And what we do here is we recite a very short liturgy by Jakob that invokes the Buddha. So there's a practice of visualization together with a devotional liturgy and the chanting of a mantra before we then settle into simply just practicing meditation as I've just described. So in this way, we talk about these things as what we sometimes say form, that we would say the meditation is preceded by form. So this can be various ways. But here, and particularly then in my tradition, it's very common that we would precede any kind of meditation of just whatever it might be with some invoking of form. Also then when we have in Vajrayana, you have what's called development and completion stage, we would invoke form in the sense of the actual nature of mind as it's embodied in what we would call deity. But for the time being here, we're really just practicing something that's universal across the various Buddhist traditions that we call Buddha Anusmriti, the recollecting of the Buddha. So we do this. I'll just very gently or very briefly say there's I'll bring up the text. Let's see here. I'll bring up the text. I think it's page 3 in the printed version. Then there's a quote which says, in the Samadhi-Raj Sutra. So that's actually really, that's quite significant. And that's actually what we do with the practice of Buddha Anusmriti, is that simply recollecting the Buddha, we're actually connecting with that which is beyond ordinary conceptual mind. The ordinary mind would grasp at all sorts of objects that elicit various ordinary states of mind. But the memory of the Buddha itself actually is something that takes us beyond the ordinary scope, the ordinary mind. So that's where, hold on, I'm just having a little bit of issues here with my computer. I think we're good. Okay. So that is the overall purpose, really, of the practice of Buddha Anusmriti, is that we engage in actually the vision of the Bodhisattvas. The moment that we're thinking of the Buddha, the moment we're thinking of the Dalai Lama or our teacher, whatever, we're yanked immediately. We're yanked out of ordinary standard immersion in what we could call the imaginary nature, the way that we're stuck in our ordinary perceptions. Of course, this has a lot to do with if we have devotion to the Buddha. We might be devotees of, let's say, the Virgin of Guadalupe or Mahatma Gandhi, and so forth. So in that case, we could invoke our teacher in one way or another. But really, this is essentially what yanks us out of what we would call ordinariness. So that's where we could say that, particularly then this obviously speaks to Buddhists, they would say we imagine the Buddha, the beautiful, how to say, his pure body is the color of gold, beautiful, is the protector of the world. And also the liturgy that we have here is very bhakti. So we might, as modern persons, we might get the heebie-jeebies if we come across bhakti liturgy, you know, that you're the protector of the world, you're the sole refuge, and so forth. And we sort of ponder the qualities of the Buddha. We might do, the language that's used here is unapologetically bhakti, in the sense of it is highlighting the Buddha as the refuge, as the, you could say, embodiment of reality. And in that sense, the language, of course, is very much for Buddhists. So I hope you're okay with that. But again, this here is not really about something which is about the Buddha, but the Buddha rather represents, and why we take refuge initially in the Buddha is because we would say the Buddha is free from delusion. So we talk about the awakened one. So in that sense, we could extract the universality of the Buddha in the sense of really just saying, I'm taking refuge and I'm celebrating the absence of delusion as embodied in the Buddha. Anyway, here we operate with the form. So initially we start off with what we call taking refuge, and then also we develop this attitude that we're not just taking refuge for our own little private nirvana, but we are taking refuge for the purpose of actually eliminating confusion from the world at large. So that's where we would say we develop bodhicitta, where we say through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood. With that, we actually mean that we practice the paramitas: generosity, discipline, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. And that's essentially the practice of the path of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then the next verses are where we say, may all sentient beings enjoy happiness in the cause of happiness. There's nothing not to like about that. That is essentially just wishing that everybody has the causes of happiness. And then there's the visualization itself. We would say the Buddha, when we visualize it, appears, yet there's nothing tangible. And that's where we would say this is the union of unborn emptiness. There's nothing that we can grasp about this. And this is the nature of reality. So as such, the visualization of the Buddha is understood as being an empty form, something that cannot be grasped, yet vividly present. So we visualize the Buddha surrounded by the Buddha's entourage and students. And then we have the seven, what we call the seven aspects of puja, or the seven services, which is we bow to the Buddha, we make offerings, we rejoice, we recognize our confusion, we supplicate the Buddha to always be present within the world. And then following that, then there's a short liturgy of invoking the Buddha. Again, this very much is about this quality of just deeply appreciating it. That's where we might have been brought up in the tradition of skepticism, and definitely when we come to the Buddhist tradition, we're very encouraged to be skeptical, but we should also be skeptical of skepticism. And that's where we don't fall into cynicism. And that's where there are things in the world, and there is something that is worth being, you could say, in awe of, and that is the awakened condition. In this case, we're visualizing the Buddha as the embodiment of the awake condition. So that's where we unapologetically supplicate the Buddha with complete adoration. So, so in this way, we supplicate the Buddha, and then we chant the mantra. And we do this briefly. And then at the end, we relinquish the external reference to the Buddha and simply just recognizing the Buddha within, settle into meditation. So we would first chant the liturgy, and then we would practice meditation without the external reference. And then just coming back to the practice of mindfulness on the basis of reference to the breath, and also the practice of the vipassana aspect of whatever, not being distracted by the thoughts, and in not being distracted by the thoughts, simply just connecting with a wider perspective. So we do this on the basis of the liturgy, and then 15 minutes of sitting, 5 minutes of walking, and then again 15 minutes of sitting. And then we conclude with dedication. So that's the program. So we'll just take a 1 minute break. You can stretch your legs or whatever, and then we'll begin.
Yeah, we'll wait.
In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be separated from the sacred happiness, devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel-lion throne, and lotus, sun, and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the Shakyas. His collar of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircle him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadras offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one, I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teaching ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the 3 jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, Glorious Conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, Perfect Buddha, Glorious Conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Yatao Muni Mahamunaya Soha. 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 Om Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om Muni Mahamunaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. And then the aspiration prayer of Maitreya. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas, endowed with the divine eye of the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all low realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away, and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhamma Dhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings, no life force. There is no truly existent individual, and no nurturing of a self. May I realize the Dharmata, where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping on to a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain constant. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in the bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish evermore and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teachings live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you very much, everyone. And